Okay, so hi everybody. Welcome to our speaker series addressing all different approaches to health and longevity. I will just do a brief introduction of myself. That the reason I'm involved in this area at all were several health related experiences that I had in my own life, and the way I saw it looked like voodoo, but it was medicine. It was another approach to health. It looked like magic. It looked like voodoo medicine, whatever. It required me to start asking a lot of questions and to really dig deeper into what is possible out there, because I don't think we have even scratched that surface, but we do have so anyway, it inspired me to write a novel based on real scientists and real science. And the novel is called The Human Trial. And it's the first of a trilogy, a medical thriller trilogy. I'm working on a second as we speak. Well, not exactly as we speak. Um, and anyway, and so it's going to be the first in 3 novels based on this semi-suppressed science and on the real scientists who made these discoveries almost 100 years ago now. And so it's actually exploring the gap between quantum physics of Einstein and Bohr and medicine as it's practiced today. So that's what my books are about, and I am thrilled to welcome Dr. Billy Buffington. Do you want me to call you Dr. Billy Buffington?
You can call me Billy or Dr. Billy Buffington. Audrey, you can pick.
I'll call you Dr. Billy. I like that better. So it's funny, we actually have a connection. I was just showing him a photo I came across literally today. We have a mutual friend that we're both very close to, who started a charity called The World is Just a Book Away. It's a charity that builds children's libraries in some of the most forgotten places on the globe. And so anyway, that was how we originally met. He was doing the ambassador program for the charity while he was at USC, and I was on the board of the charity, and I still am on the board of the charity. And so we've known each other for a while, but this is reconnection after quite a bit of time. And anyway, so in the meantime, Dr. Billy has gotten his medical degree from Columbia University. He's doing further study of psychiatry at Dartmouth. And I think his reasons for choosing psychiatry and his approach to medicine is so unique and interesting that I really just want to turn it over to you, Dr. Billy, and tell us a bit about how you got the journey to get you to where you are today in your life and your career.
Yeah, thanks, Audrey. So I came to this point. It's been a long road, of course. And it's fun to look around sometimes and think the long-term plan, maybe 10, 15 years ago is actually working. And playing out. And I think I came to this in a bit of a non-traditional way. So a lot of people will start with a plan to go to medical school, maybe because their parents were a doctor, or they'll go there right after undergraduate. But if I take maybe a half step back to orient around this question around what makes us well, and not looking at any one field, but around all the different threads in this tapestry of well-being, because it's not one thing, it's really everything. And I think, like many in the field, I started with was trying to heal some of my own injuries. I was an athlete in high school, and I was a very avid weightlifter, football player, downhill ski racer, track athlete, and I ended up breaking my back actually in a weightlifting accident. And to heal from that, I had to teach myself all the principles of weightlifting, strength training, and create my own way back so I could continue as an athlete, which was in question at points. And I was able to do that. I was able to compete as an athlete in college. But what it did was it turned me on to this question of human health, first through the body, and would progress then through the more subtle and deeper layers, starting with the body. How do I excel in performance on the field? How do I excel? And once I learned that, how do I teach that to others? And so I studied some human performance and biology and exercise science at USC, and also studied business and biology more broadly. And as I looked into those questions, I also, in my early 20s, began to confront some of the challenges of my earlier life. I had, like many people, we had our house taken away by the bank at one point. There was addiction issues in my family, and as a young man, I was in the mode of the strategy of push it down and move forward, which many people know works until it doesn't work anymore. And in my early 20s, starting to confront what is this inner emotional landscape and how do I work with it? How do I work with these difficult experiences that become doorways actually to the gold, right? That's inside all of us. And so graduating college, I was working at the intersection of health and technology, knowing this wasn't my long-term plan, and really not feeling aligned in my work. And so being in Southern California, I did what one does in their early 20s, which was start to discover meditation, start to look towards Eastern practices, Buddhism, Taoism, and looking for answers of truth within myself of where I had this burning desire, this voracious search that I really needed to find something important for my capital L life. At the time, I really thought I had to find the answer to that. And in those searches, I discovered this integrative way of looking at the world, this interconnectedness of all things of life through going inwards. And so it was this discovery of body and then mind and then spirit in my own path that kind of somewhat paradoxically through myself connected me to the rest of the world. And as I searched for how I would bring that together in a vocation, in a life, it was actually somewhat of a surprise. I was searching far and wide up the West Coast and going to all the meetings and meeting with every successful person who would answer my calls and trying to kind of learn my way into my path. And I kept coming back to medicine for various reasons. And it was a bit surprising because medicine actually, at that time, looking at it, felt very broken. It was a very reactive system. It was very siloed. And I had a switch at one point where I thought, actually, that's a really good reason to go into it. The fact that there were all these problems, actually means it's like a really amazing opportunity. And it's a reason to turn towards it rather than away. And also knew in our society some of the things I was really interested in at the time, which were meditation, was interested. This was in the early days where psychedelic medicines were still more taboo in the scientific mainstream. Just different ideas of consciousness that I knew intuitively, even though I was only, say, 23 at the time, if I wanted to put forth some of these more radical ideas, I'd need probably a few letters behind my name so people would listen to me and not just write me off, because these weren't new. Many of these ideas weren't new. Take meditation as an example, just the contemplative path. This stuff has been here for thousands of years, and yet in many areas people have really pushed that away. And really understanding this othering that happens to folks. If you see somebody who looks like maybe a yogi and they're talking about some of these topics, for a lot of people, triggers their defenses. Not like me, they won't really be able to take the information in. Whereas somebody who's coming from your truth system, a Western educated medical doctor who knows the science, but also is open to some of these other domains, it felt like that was a smart way to get to be a bridge, which in a word is what I see as my role, is bridging between some of these different systems and traditions and ways of thought. So that brought me up to the idea to go to get medical training. I moved to New York City. I did that at Columbia. And then psychiatry was a very natural extension of that, that within the medical system, psychiatry gets the closest to this consideration of the whole human. It certainly, the traditional field has many limits itself, and the history of it is very dark and colored in many ways. It has definitely done some good, but also a lot of harm. But as a vehicle to be able to take in the best of that training, and then to get to continue to weave in all of these other threads, that is the grounding. Just kind of found my way to it, knowing the whole time that I would be able to make it my own, that it wasn't about going into medicine or psychiatry, any of these fields for what they were, but for what I felt like they needed to become in order to meet these evolving needs of this crazy place we find ourselves in, which is 2024 America, which is filled with novel and growing problems in many ways. And so then that led me to New York, the most urban medical training in the country, and now I'm at Dartmouth Hitchcock, which is the most rural academic medical center. And so really getting to explore the centers of culture and people and life, and then now tapping back into the more than human world and the earth and the seasons and all of these things. So it's been a fun ride that that I had just enough sense, I feel like, in my early 20s to shift from where do I want to be when I'm 25 to what do I want to do with my life. And it's been a lot of training to get here, but it's quite enjoyable as well. So
let me ask you, Billy. So you have this very encompassing view of medicine and psychiatry and where it could go. Are you finding that path is working for you? Are you finding pushback? Are you seeing that this could really be a possibility, this all-pervasive Eastern medicine, Western medicine, indigenous practices? Are you seeing that could actually come about in our lifetimes?
Great question.
You're gonna live a lot longer than some of us. So
Yeah, I would say yes and no. There are, I think it will happen. It's just a matter of how it happens. Now, like the way that I'm approaching these topics, one of the ways that I look at this question of living well is as I don't see the silos, as you can hear. I don't see the silos between things, which can be a challenge, but it's also perhaps one of the gifts I bring to this, is just that's how my mind works.
So let me just interrupt you. So when you say silos, I hear that as the over specialization that we have in
Yes.
especially medicine, but in all sorts of forms.
Yes, correct.
Okay.
That's exactly right. And there's a place for it, especially longer ago. There's a place for specialization to make sense of a very complicated world. There's certainly a place for it. But what we have in medicine, as an example, what we have in our system is people who have such expertise within the lens of the skin or the digestive tract or the brain or the mind or the eye, right? And as we all know, these are inextricably connected systems. And so we get these lenses that, unfortunately, we lose the forest for the trees, right? As the saying goes, especially when things haven't been figured out, which they haven't, right? That's one of the things we forget a lot of times in medicine and in science broadly, maybe even Western society. It's a bit of an arrogance that we know what's going on because we have figured out a lot of really clever things. Like not that we know nothing, far from, but it turns out at each layer, the complexity that is this orchestration of our biological energetic being is just so much more brilliant and beautiful and weird and mysterious. And the quantum is pointing straight at this. This is actually much more bizarre in many ways than we would maybe appreciate in our normal waking, breathing being. And so within that siloing, it is and other factors as well. There's certainly a calcification. There's a calcification around the way that we look at things in medicine, around our paradigms, right? The concept of a paradigm that we have, and Audrey, your book, I'm sure touching into a good example of a paradigm would be that Newtonian physics into the non-classical physics, right? Einstein. It's a fundamental departure point, and up until you get to that paradigm, everything within your earlier paradigm, the outside stuff looks crazy. People think, oh, you're the crazy one, right? Until you break through, and then you have a whole new framework with which to understand the world. And so our medical system, which is an outgrowth of our society, which is an important point as well, the same imbalances, the same biases, the same kind of reductionist viewpoint, the same bias towards certain ways of understanding the world, certain ways of cognizing the world, that is born out of all of Western civilization, how we choose to go about it. And kind of going back, there's interesting work on the hemispheres of our brains by Ian McGilchrist and different folks that it's quite literally being in a different state of being, which much of us know from accessing creative states, where we're not planning things in an ABC linear motion, but we're actually letting the world, almost holding it, letting it come to us in a way that's, not with this narrow scope of attention, but that is integrative, taking it all in the way that the Taoists would say, in a non-gendered feminine way of things, in kind of more of an earth-centered way of things.
And is that working for you in the field of medicine?
It's a mixed bag. It's difficult at times, and to kind of circle back to your question about will we get there, how will we do this? I look at it as top down and bottom up. There are these big systems, and a lot of people in these big systems, they don't have time to wait for the revolution. People are very sick right now, and they don't have time or money to go pay for somebody outside the system who might be practicing without insurance companies getting to dictate the way that they practice, which is a big limitation on many providers. And so working in some of these systems, I do a lot of work with the VA, and they're actually very good in this regard because they are a single payer, top down. They actually have a lot more appreciation they have a whole health program. So putting in Qigong, right? Putting in gardening and for their veterans, right? Getting to say, oh, there's actually something very profound. Oliver Sacks said there's only two things that each of his patients, this great neurologist, only two things every patient responded positively to in his entire career. One was music and the other was gardening. And so there are big calcified top-down systems that are making some progress, and they can deploy to millions of people, and they're not nearly as radical as a change that we frankly need. And so that's when you're looking to alternative ways outside the system and more towards the future of a decentralized health system, where we have these centralized top-down tertiary care centers that we've put all of our health into. And if you have a very complex disease with this complicated surgery, that's where you want to go. But fundamentally, health is not something to be found in a faraway hospital. In fact, that's managing disease. Health is something traditionally, for most of human history, is the domain of the people, of the community, right? Community is a challenge for many of our society, much of our society now. But looking at, kind of really different ways of how to do it in a radical way, I think is just as important as moving the needle of doing science of meditation and psychedelics and the electromagnetic bases of our being, which is going to, kind of in the long run, show that these integrative ways, we're like learning the science of things that have been said for a long time. And to me, that's part of the game I'm playing, which is, being able to get into the complexity to communicate to other doctors. Oh, here's why sunlight is really important to you. Here's why you need to have your bare feet on the earth. Here is why, having some time and quiet, we can talk about, your intuitive wisdom would tell you all of this. But as you alluded to earlier, like a lot of folks are really disconnected from their intuitive wisdom. And of course they are, because to be alive in this society, you have to dissociate. Most people do. To be sitting indoors all day in front of a computer, your body's screaming at you if you're really listening to it, because that's not how we're designed to live. So in those lights, it makes sense that we've got a lot of reconnecting to do. But the good news is there's a lot there that we can call upon, and it's not rocket science to get to do it. It is a bit more complicated than rocket scientists to explain it, which is where we find ourselves. But to actually do it is very simple. You just need to really get outside and engage with the earth.
Well, so tell us about that a little bit. Tell us about the importance of your feet on the earth and sunlight and fresh air and moving around during the day and getting, moving your blood is one of the things I always think about exercise doing.
Yeah. No, that's the really important question, is what do we can have fun diving into all the subfields of physics about what's happening, but what do we do? And it circles actually to the theme of your book, Audrey, which is an important piece to just preface this, is that we have been looking at health and disease and biology and medicine broadly from what we'd call a biochemical view. So we're looking at chemistry. How are molecules floating around, interacting with each other? This is pharmacology, the science of drugs. This is all the cartoons you see about how metabolism works. And what has been there the whole time, and this really gets to the core of your book, Audrey, but it's been a bit disparate, and we can dive into why this is the case it is now, why this has been left behind so much of the science. But fundamentally, we are energetic beings. We are electromagnetic beings, and underneath those chemical reactions are forces that put all of those molecules into a pattern, into a place, and help them move and have a much more beautiful, larger order to things. And this is beautiful, it's profound, it's super interesting, and it's intuitively something that people throughout time know when we talk about things like, feeling different types of energy. When we talk about our internal experience, this often comes up. I bring that up to say, what are the two primary regulators of this energetic system? And these are the natural electromagnetic fields of the Earth we inhabit. That's the sun on one side, and it's the Earth below you. The two constants we have is light, which is an electromagnetic field, the visible and much beyond, and Earth, the magnetic flux field of the Earth. It's called the Schumann resonance. It vibrates at the same frequency as one of our resting state brain waves. We're very entrained to this whole system. So why is that important? Because on the cycles of the day, on the cycles of the month and the year, these are the cues, the primary external cues in our environment that help set the structure for our body and all its millions of processes to make sense, to have order. It's the scaffolding on which everything else exists. I mean, so we really get lost in the weeds with some of the downstream things, looking at this biochemical picture, when something as simple as getting out, the profundity of getting out and seeing the sunrise. I cannot, if you took one thing away, I want to have an actionable insight from all these big words and my ramblings. It would be never miss the sunrise. And it doesn't matter if it's cloudy, doesn't matter if it's rainy, those rays are getting through the clouds. Bare feet on the ground, even better. You're helping harmonize to the charge of the earth. And you're also sinking between the two. And so having skin exposed to the sun early in the morning, it's this peeling red light. It's not the energetic sun yet. And watching the sun come up, if you just did that, it would change your health in a really profound way that you notice with better sleep that night. And over the long term, helps your body be much more robust to all the things that happen as we age. And so watching the sunrise, watching it set, and I would say as well, if you can get some sun in the middle of the day as well, it's what reminds us what our bodies, what time it is. And it syncs up this beautiful orchestration that we have. And ironically, the public health messaging as of late has made us afraid of that which gives us life. You'll notice this is somewhat in opposition, though there's nuance here to, we've been so concerned about melanoma, for example, that we have forgotten the rest of the picture, which we know from good research that the more sun you get, the less you die from all causes, right? Like you might have a slight increase in melanoma, and that's even debatable. We can talk about that. But my job as a doctor is not to decrease the odds of melanoma in isolation. It's to help people live longer and have less suffering. And the sun, if I could get one message across, plays a very important role there.
I think you just said something incredible, which is if you got more sun, it would absolutely impact your health in a very positive way. And that's one very simple thing everybody can do, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Wow. You're right. It's just not, I think we've just come to think of ourselves as a series of chemical reactions. And you're just talking about lining up with electromagnetic fields that we are walking through, living in 100% of the time, that we've sort of forgotten because we don't see it or feel it, is how we evolved. That's who we are. That's our evolution.
And it's not just us, it's every animal on Earth for the last 1 billion years evolved under that sun as the primary, the Germans have a word for it. It's called Zeitberger. It's primary external cue. And so it's all life on Earth. And to think that in the last 100 years, we've reduced our solar exposure is a first in history of life on Earth. We've gone inside, we've created artificial lighting. We've had rise of all sorts of diseases in that time period as well. I mean, it is a profound shift. And again, the thing I always think is important to remind here is I don't need to tell you this because all of us know this intuitively. Go sit out in the sun, especially after a winter. I'm up here in New Hampshire. Our bodies know this. Our mothers know this, right? Look at pictures from medicine 100 years ago. They're in solariums. The beds are out getting fresh air and sunshine. That is the least original thought in all of intuitive health from the history of humans across species, across time. And yet we're having to rediscover it because we get so lost in, an abstracted form of health, which again can help us, right? Like we've learned things through modern medicine that are dazzling, and we've able to really cure and ameliorate disease in some pretty profound ways. But it's been at this expense of an unbalance, that we have to balance this system of, in Chinese medicine, we've called the yang, right, with the yin, right, this kind of, in a non-gendered way, again, this masculine kind of thought structured, A to B to C, with the yin of integrative, intuitive approach to things. And our society, our medical system is really extreme on one side, and it's not an either or, but a yes and. How do we bring both of these into harmony and call upon both systems? Because if we're listening to our bodies, we know these things. Being outside, fresh air, sun, grass under our feet, these feel good.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. I mean, listening to our bodies, I think that's something we've kind of been trained away from. And the other aspect that occurs to me as I'm listening to you is we have such a trained belief that a pill or a drug or some chemo or something will fix us. And that's all we have to do. That's all we have to do is pop a pill. So it's sort of untraining ourselves to be a little more, to go with our intuition.
Mm.
And I think, I don't know, it seems like everything we've kind of learned about our medical approach to life in the United States has been about drugs, pills, doctors telling you pop this and you'll be fine, call me in the morning. I don't know how you feel about that, but that's sort of my impression.
I think this can open up a really big and important conversation, which is that, I'll tell you just a very brief story. I was once at a conference around psychedelic medicines, many of them, coming from indigenous sides of things. And there's this concept called integration. You have these big, they can be very healing. I don't know how familiar everyone's here with this type of work. A big, magic mushrooms, for example, and some of these different, or peyote and some of these different Native American lineages, this big experience. And then there's this concept afterwards of integration. What are all the tools you use to help integrate it, to help nurture the seeds that have been planted metaphorically, to help it sink in? And that's a big talk in medicine and psychology. What are all, therapies and community and movement and writing and art? And we're asking this indigenous elder, about how they approach integration. And he had a moment where he kind of just like paused and almost had to stop. And he said, no. It's like, our culture is medicine. Like, our culture, the whole culture is medicine. And what he meant there is that the ecology of healing surrounding, in this case, psychedelic practice, it's already built into the culture in the way that it supports health and healing. Our culture is the opposite of that. The way that we are going about things, it is a full-time job, and we're in opposition to try to be well and healthy. Whether it's the way we move, eat, our lighting environments, the structures, if you just go with the flow, yes, we have had profound improvements in health through things like sanitation, through things like potable water, certain infectious diseases, nutrition has gotten better, and at least having like massive vitamin deficiencies. But when we look about how we're moving or not, or eating or breathing or in touch with nature, which is such a fundamental component, we're so far away from it. And so I bring that up, Audrey, because this conversation around how we're approaching healing, the just take a pill, want to do something, wanting to just do a little reactive thing where we're not asking for big changes, is a few things. One, that's kind of what our culture has come to want, right? There is an imposition on medicine, and I'm very critical of it, to need to lead and offer more. But it's also an outgrowth of the way our entire system, like medicine is an outgrowth of our entire society. I think was one of the most important revelations I had going to medical school, already very critical, is it's not medicine per se, it's our entire way of going about things as a society. And it's an important thing to see. It's also challenging that what we're needing, in my view, is no less than a kind of a reformation of how our value systems, right? Our approach to health. Like, health leads us to a conversation around all of these things, because medicine is acting, and it's also doing an impossible job. It's trying to like rescue people from decades of a society that doesn't understand nor promote nor value well-being or health. And so there are some things it can do, but really you've got to go so far upstream. Now, not to say it can't improve on the downstream, so to speak. It very well can. We can talk lots about it, and there are much better ways we can do in medicine. But to me, this conversation gets brought to, if we're relying on medicine for health to begin with, right? We've already kind of missed so much of what we need to capture. And yet, of course, when I see a patient, whether it's somebody with PTSD or congestive heart failure in front of me, this isn't the conversation I'm giving them, because, you know, that doesn't help them, right? Oh, you should have lived in a different society and had different parents. That helps nobody, right? So in those situations, we still need to call upon all of these different tools, right, to help with. But I do think it's a very important thing as we look at and critique the systems, is we need to take a few steps back if we want this real radical change that I think you and I and many of us are really hungry for.
Wow, so in your talk about, I agree with what you've said about our society in general has kind of promoted these disconnections from the evolutionary humans that we all are. But one thing I'd like to just explore with you briefly is, it seems to me that medicine and maybe most segments of our society are really focused on money and power. And I think particularly in medicine, the whole drug industry is kind of taking a bad rap now because, you know, the cost of medicines, well, you know, the Harvard MD that I quote all the time, Dr. John Abramson, says that we pay twice as much as any other privileged country on earth for the exact same drugs in most cases and pretty much the same kind of treatment. So there's something so out of whack with the focus on money here, particularly in the United States, I believe, because we are paying out the ear, and we don't even get to talk about cures very often. We get to talk about remission or some life extension. So if that's, to me, is seems more out of whack in this country than any place else. And I don't know if you could comment on that.
Oh, yes. Do you also know that for most major pharmaceutical companies, their marketing budgets are larger than their research and development budgets?
I do know that, and yet they put it all in their financial statements as, I can't remember how they disguise it anymore. Maybe it's all called marketing.
Yeah.
I don't know.
We're also one of only two industrialized countries that allows direct consumer marketing for pharmaceuticals. No, it's a giant problem, and this is one of, and there's the challenge is, it's not the only, there's actually a number of these structural forces that are very ingrained where, I look at psychiatry, for example, which is particularly, I think, pernicious, where, I mean, the industry has corrupted at every level, in research, in education, in diagnosis, and in treatment. And it's been worse. It's been getting worse, at least in psychiatry, for the last, couple decades. And which isn't to say there aren't benefits, which is what makes it challenging in some ways. Is there are, it's not to say we walk the middle ground here, which is there are some life-saving drugs. There are some really good ones, but that is our fundamental mode of healthcare, where like the pharmaceutical, like that's our backbone. And really what we count on is crazy. And in all of these systems, insurance is another example of that. One thing I look at least some of the pharmaceuticals are beneficial. There's nothing, insurance, we call it rent seeking. There's nothing the insurance companies are adding. You have United Healthcare CEO making $60 million for what? Denying claims to people. They're structurally incentivized to make it difficult for you to, everybody's tried to call their insurance company to get a bill that I'm a professional in the field and I have no idea what's going on with these things, right? And these are both systems that are entrenched in our current system. They are not, and some are directly misaligned to the health of the people. They're, of course, their value, their fiduciary duty is to their shareholder, not to the patient. Sometimes that's aligned. And so then when we talk about these big changes, like many things in our country, like our political system, like many, the greed and the financial kind of enslavement that we have to these systems, and their resistance to movement are gigantic. Sometimes you feel like I get frustrated. Sometimes you feel like knock it all down with a bolt, with a wrecking ball to rebuild it. Not so naive to see revolutions in the past. It doesn't typically work to just burn it all down, but I have that frustration at times for sure. And I don't necessarily have, I'm very loud and loud and I would say obnoxious might be too strong of a word, but this, spreading those texts to people, helping people become aware. I am encouraged, general consumers and even doctors, that, people they're angry, which isn't enough. They're becoming more aware. I think we are in an era where, patients, or broadly consumers, even though I hate that term as it relates to medicine, because that's exactly the problem. Are more like, the information is becoming more transparent, things that have been happening for a long time, perhaps getting worse. But it's, I think this is something we're seeing in all aspects of our society right now. In my opinion, our political system is hampered by the exact same conflicts, which make it not actually for the people. What really frustrates me is medicine, something that should be and has been a bit more sacred to that, because we're not talking about commerce here. And maybe, again, we are talking about commerce, which is the problem, but we're talking about something that we all have such deep connection to, life and death, and things that, should not be the domain of these purse strings. And yet, to balance it, there are mechanisms within capitalism that have allowed incredible innovation that has made the United States the leader in much of medical innovation and the scalability. And it's not to throw the baby out the bathwater here and to say it's all for naught. Of course, there are really important things. It's just there's been no guardrails in our current system, which speaks a little bit to your point around we're paying double for our pharmaceuticals bills than other countries. And so it's not, I don't claim to have the answers here, but we clearly have some structural issues that run very deep.
Right. And you touched on the political situation, and I think where I come out on all of these huge, wealthy, powerful groups and interest groups and companies is that we expect our government to be monitoring all of this. They have a job to regulate what's sold on our market. I mean, the German system is so much better than ours, as I understand it. They have a completely independent group that analyzes all medical products before they go on the market, and they have to show real improvement over what's already out there. They have to show efficacy. Otherwise, the government does not allow them, does not license them to be sold. And I don't believe we have that in any form in our country.
Well, the challenge, Audrey, is we do have that in forms, and that is what the FDA is doing, and we do have standards that can get bypassed for sure. And there's scandals like this, but there's actually, this is an interesting conversation, because we do have that, but then we also have, we have people in this country who will then want to, be very, they want freedom, right? They want to be able to get what they want, right? And say the UK, right, which they have much more of a cost benefit analysis of the NHS, what kind of drugs will we allow here? Or even in countries more socialist health systems where they say, yeah, after the age of say 70, 65, you're not getting the surgery because the years of expected life you'll have, right? We could be setting that to somebody who's 12, right? And so there's trade-offs here that we're not consciously making, I think, is the problem. We're just reacting to things. But there are trade-offs in all these sides. And then when we go look to this, I won't go too far down this rabbit hole, but there's a profound thing here as well about our entire standards of evidence, right? Because here in the system, how do you get, say, a drug or a therapy approved? It costs on average something close to $1 billion. Because a bunch of them fail, you need giant clinical trials. You need to prove through the placebo-controlled, double-blind, randomized study. And that has a lot of value to it. What that doesn't have, though, is when we talk about some of the foundations of health. Let's just talk about being in nature. Let's talk about blueberries. Let's talk about things, nutrition. You don't have a patent on blueberries. You don't have a patent on the healing benefits of trees. And so the mechanisms in place in our medical system, right, are such that the only way to fund our trials which would give us the level of evidence and confidence in this system that the system values enough to say this works, right? The system is such that you need a patentable, capitalizable therapy or drug in order to fund that entire system. So it's not to say people look at the evidence and say, no, being around trees, doesn't make you, healthy. In fact, there's a lot of research that shows biophilia does just that. But to make it into our systems, to have the gold standard of approval, we're talking millions and millions of dollars for these studies. And so that will never happen in our system. And so when we look at what's the root cause of that, there's actually something baked. Yeah, there's all these nefarious actors and players, but there's also just structural problems that people didn't set out to make about how we seek truth in this system. And those are conversations a lot of people aren't having. And so we end up with a very narrow confine. It's almost like you can look at science, of which I value, like shining a flashlight in a dark forest. And the things it shines its light on illuminate brilliantly, and we can understand all the little details and the twigs and the texture of the bark. But what we actually do is we forget that there's an entire forest outside of that. And the light itself actually blinds us even further to this entire forest. And I think that metaphor, that interconnectedness of this large forest and the mycelium underneath, we have a small view, not only of science, but of the things that science can fund, with these funding mechanisms I just spoke about. And that's okay. But the problem is when we forget that we are in this giant forest, we lose the forest for the trees, and we become very confused and cut off. And it's that bridging of, not to say spotlights are great. There's a lot to learn with that spotlight, but let that not be your only way to navigate, or you're going to run into a tree. So it's at all scales. It's spending time in this as my full job. I'm amazed by the layers go deeper, which is like, yes, it's the pharmaceutical company, there's problems there, and there's actually so much more as well, which is not to say we don't need to really go at each of these. But we do, I think, need to. This is the same question with society. Like, we really, it benefits from some steps back, and looking at the whole system. And while we do that, empowering ourselves to get to take health into our own hands, which comes from some of this knowledge, and comes really, the simplest is reconnecting to nature. We could talk more about some of these other things we can do, aside like seeing the sunrise and spending time. But, one of the simplest things is, whether it's in the shade, in the sun, we could talk about the complex quantum physics behind this, but spending as much time as you can outside, it turns out everything is built into that already. Like, the best thing you could do for your health is like spend as much time as you can outside. If you're on your laptop and you can be on your porch, be on your laptop on your porch. If you can exercise and you can be outside while you exercise, whether that's jogging, whether that's lifting a light weight, whether that's doing a game instead of being in, an artificially lit gym, opt for outside always. That will save you PhDs worth of having to learn about what's going underneath, which is, I could talk for hours about it because it's so interesting. But it's poetic, right? It's like we've been severed from our connection to the earth, to the sun, to the trees, and returning to it. The latest, most complex science is actually showing us, like, hey, that's where the health of all of us lies. And that's not relying on somebody to come up with a brand new medication or some super complex,
Right.
new device. It's there for all of us. And there's something really beautiful and democratizing and liberating about that. Actually, some people are, I was going to say nobody's blocking the sun, but there are actually people trying to propose blocking the sun to solve climate change. And it's the most upside down view, but here we are.
Please don't
Please
even
don't do
say
that.
that.
Please don't.
Don't even say that. So, so it's really, all these complex issues kind of boil down to what you said from the beginning, which is, we are electromagnetic beings, whether we can perceive it or not. We live in an electromagnetic world, and all of creation is an electromagnetic field. And what we need to do is get outside and let it be a part of us. Let it penetrate us. Let's reset our biorhythms, or our electromagnetic fields. So, what I have sensed in these speakers series is that everyone's wanting to know how to take back some control. And I think what you've offered is the most beautiful and simple solution. Get sun, get fresh air, move around, be exposed to light. And I think that that's exactly what we're looking for, how to take back control.
It is time for Q&A, Audrey.
Q&A. Do you have some cues for us?
Well, first, I do have a comment from Jennifer who says, my son was the marketing director for Merck Pharma, and his marketing budget just for social media, just for one cancer medication, was 150 million a year.
Whoa,
It's just
whoa,
something to
whoa,
Wow.
whoa.
think. And that's just for one medication and just for social media. So that's not involved in anything.
That says it all, doesn't it?
No,
Yeah.
it does. And many of those medications, you know, and this goes for all fields, but they're debatable improvements along the old ones, but it's the new shiny thing. And so the disproportionate amount of millions that get paid, you know, and there's really some really great doctors and scientists who are fighting that fight of just saying this is ridiculous. The standards we have for some of these new drugs are ridiculous. You know, it's one thing if it's, you know, we have melanoma therapies right now that are truly changing the picture of the diagnosis. And there are therapies like that change the way cystic fibrosis, great example, was a death sentence. Now people live into old age. You know, that has happened, you know, in the generation of people on this call. It's been a profound triumph of science. But most things are not that, you know, those exist. And then many of them are, you know, lining the pocket. There are these misaligned incentives.
Yeah.
And that's a crazy number, Jennifer.
Wow. That's crazy.
Next question is, Billy, explain how the electromagnetic system works in a way that we can feel or see it.
Yeah.
Can't do either one of those.
That's a great question.
And just a second question with that is, how does electromagnetism heal?
Yeah,
that's a great. Say the last part again, Jesse. I'm sorry.
How does electromagnetism, I could be saying that wrong, heal?
Yeah, so I'll start with that second question first, which is really, it's an important reorientation that the whole body plan, the whole orchestration of there's millions of things happening inside of us right now. And the foundation of that is electricity, electromagnetic forces. And it's really, we've known this for a long time. If you get a cut, you can measure the field at the cut and it changes, because that change in the field is what allows the tissue to create the order to heal the wound. This is what happens in embryology. There's a question that's been, I remember when I was in medical school, this issue of from a clump of cells, how the embryo, the fetus organizes itself into a human. I remember when I got the lecture, they said, yeah, we don't know how that happens. We don't know how it works, right? And it turns out it is, and there's still many questions here, not to say we have this figured out by any stretch of the measure, because there's a complexity to it we still don't understand. But what it turns out is that these signals, these electromagnetic signals in our body, are what create the blueprint. They're very implicated in it seems in cancer as well, because this is cell growth and organization. And so to get at the first part of the question, the way that it heals is that our body is actually profound in this way. If you look at, I mean, we don't stop to think enough about one of the really key features of life, right? It's self-replicating, self-organizing, and actually there's an orientation in towards all of us towards wholeness. There's a way, and this is true in matters of the body, and then in matters of the psyche and soul as well. Things can get in the way, right, and prevent the organism from healing itself. But like as a doctor, when somebody comes into the emergency department, you know, and they got a big cut, you know, I might take stuff out of there. You know, I might take, you know, debris out of it, clean it out. I might even put a few stitches in to bring the skin closer together, but I'm not healing that wound, right? I have no idea how to make skin regrow and tissues and blood vessels. Like that's the body orienting its own plan. And so the electromagnetism is that primary underlying force. It's one of the fundamental forces of physics, but that energy you could think out of it as is how the body knows to do what to do and where to do it. And so in terms of how it heals, we have our environment is what helps set and regulate this energetic system of our body. The sun, the earth, it actually charges us as well. We learn now the power centers in our cells from the infrared light. It quite literally charges us. We get a lot of our energy, not just from food, but from the sun and from the light.
Nice.
And so these tools around us, they quite literally imbue us and with healing frequencies and with energizing frequencies. But they also provide, if you have a system that's just chaotic and disorganized, right? Like it's going to be dissonant, right? It's like, think of sound waves, or think of an orchestra where you've got all people, a bunch of kindergartners playing, right? It's going to be chaotic and cringing. But if you have a symphony that is playing with coherence, and playing with harmony, right? That's how the body, right? That's the kind of waves and the kind of movement of the body. And without getting, into all of, some of the underlying science, it is this cueing with our environments. And also then we have to appreciate that the artificial environments can be damaging as well. I'm doing a terrible job modeling right now with this light here at 9 o'clock in New Hampshire. But just as important as that light in day is not confusing our body with signals at night. So you don't want to have light as an electromagnetic frequency. You don't want to have bright light at nights. You want to have dim, keep the floor lights on, keep it nice and dark. Don't live next to a cell phone tower, antenna if you can, manage it, right? Like these types of things are detrimental aspects of our current world. So that's a lot of words to say. It's really, you can think of it as, kind of that fundamental structure on which the rest of our system plays. And if we're not cueing into the environment like that, it's like we're doing it on hard mode. It's like trying to heal without having these aspects attended to is like trying to learn to juggle on a surfboard. It's like you probably could, but try just doing diet and exercise without attending to, say, our lighting environment it's just so difficult. And unfortunately, it's not something that most doctors are and most patients, most people really have an appreciation for how important. And that will change. You'll see over the coming 5 to 10 years, because the hard science is there. This will become much more fundamental. It's just it's lagging behind a bit.
Wow, that's interesting. So yeah, I'm kind of blown away by it. I've talked about this previously, about disease is like a dissonant state. It's like nothing in the body is harmonizing. It's all working against each other. And health is that perfectly conducted symphony where every piece knows when to come in and they play together beautifully and in harmony. So it was great to hear you say that, since you have medical training and I don't, but I do study. I'm wondering if you've read any of the people that are in my bibliography, like Dr. Becker, who did that whole study about how wounds that changes your electrical systems in your body change direction and go to the wound and decide to take specialized cells and despecialize them to whatever you needed first, whether it's blood or tissue or bone or whatever. And then once that's set, it then despecializes more and builds your whole wound back up. And then the direction of the electrical flow returns to normal. It's just fascinating stuff. And it's been known. He was writing his books in the 50s, I believe.
Yeah, it's close. He was doing some of the work in the 50s, but really doing his books in the 70s and 80s. But yeah, Dr. Robert O. Becker, he's a pioneer in the field. I'm very familiar with his work.
Oh, good.
Groundbreaking stuff that, the fact that, and it's, he's got some popular books, The Body Electric, Cross Currents, and Dr. Dr. Andrew Marino, who we did work with. That fact that stuff, this is a great example, Audrey, that's not taught as your, not even just in medical school, but it's not taught in with a biology degree, because, there's reason, part of it is because it's outside of a paradigm, like it doesn't fit a lot of these. And he's also discoveries from earlier on, Albert St. Georgi and people going, Gilbert Ling, who created the discoveries that would end up making the MRI machine. There are these pioneers throughout time who profound discoveries, because it doesn't fit in this huge primary paradigm. They're not in the textbooks. They're not taught to the people. So they're kind of just sitting around there. And there have been people through time who've been putting it together. And there's a few now doing that. But it's wild, because once you learn that, Audrey, exactly as you put, the fact that we haven't taken his work, there's just some people who are starting to do more work on that now. But the fact that hadn't had so much more funding put into it is really unfortunate, and
Yeah.
it really it gets, his work really gets to the core of a lot of this. It's really, if somebody wants to learn more about a piece of this, Body Electric is a very approachable popular science book that he wrote with one of his collaborators, Dr. Andrew Marino, which is it's a very good book.
That's in my bibliography. And also another very interesting author. She's British. She's a young British woman. She wrote We Are Electric by Sally Addy.
Mm.
And she talks about the ion network in our body, which is even more rapidly connecting the entire body to whatever's going on in terms of reaction. Anyway, there's lots of good stuff out there, and we don't have to dwell on this. I think we might have more
We've got a
Yes,
couple
getting more
questions.
questions coming in. And we are almost out of time, but I do want to try to pick them out. MDMA has been shown to help with PTSD and used for marriage counseling. Can you give any insight on what other treatments it's used for and how close we are to getting it approved for medical use?
Yes, Jennifer, we could do a multi-hour talk on that question.
What is an MDMA?
So MDMA stands for methylene dioxymethamphetamine. It is the active ingredient in the street drug ecstasy.
Okay.
And it was discovered we don't need to go into the history of it, but it was used actually in the therapy underground with a lot of excitement before it caught on in the club world and then was banned by the FDA. And for the last 25 years, there's been actually nonprofit funded work to bring this as a healing modality, specifically through PTSD, because in very short, what it does is it creates a state of safety within the person, this overwhelming feeling of love, connection, and safety, which for PTSD in particular allows people to then go explore territory and topics that have become so traumatized that their nervous system goes into red alert when they get anywhere near it. And so it's it's a modality I'm trained in from the founders of that, of the modern day founders, Michael and Annie Mithofer. So I'm very familiar with it, and it's profound. Is one of the big reasons when I decided to go back to school. I was hearing the founder, Rick Doblin, who's been spearheading this work, give a talk on some of the data and potential for it. What in brief, and I know I've got at least another 10 minutes after the 9:30 to stick on. But in brief, it is a first of its kind in that it's a drug therapy combo, and so these represent a class we call experiential therapies for psychology, and it's a 6 to 8 hour session with 2 therapists. And so in a very different way, this is different than the pop the pill, go let the antidepressant work on your brain chemistry. This is something where you're actually taking something that helps you re-experience, say, this traumatic memory, remold and re-alchemize the experience over a long period of time, so you actually are feeling into what's happening and can make it talk therapy essentially much more potent. In marriage counseling, profound as well, with couples who over time you build up walls, you have things that that are difficult to communicate, or you have challenges. This is something that can help take some of those fear centers away, so you're able to communicate the thing that's really on your heart without fear of the other person getting hurt, them hurting you. There's an intimacy of connection that can be that can be birthed by it. And since we don't have hours to go into that, what I will say is that there's a breakthrough therapy designation by the FDA. We think it's going to be in August where we're going to get the official word on. There are some challenges to the research, but it looks more likely than not that we will get approval for it, which would be amazing, because then we can use it for PTSD, but we can also use it for other indications. And it's a medicine that I think just has profound, it's almost non-specific in the way that it creates like a love bomb, like really creates a state of overwhelming love that is really great to marriage to apply to other people. But actually, I think it's more profound when you put a blindfold on and then have that love directed to the inner parts of ourselves that aren't receiving, that we're judgmental of, that we don't allow, being the first step towards like inner alchemy and change. As the great humanist Carl Rogers said, the curious paradox is that once I accept myself as I am, then I am able to change. And MDMA is a tool that can be very helpful in that process. So it's really exciting, and we'll be looking towards this summer for approval.
Wow, that is profound. What else, Jesse?
It is 6:30 or 9:30 in the East Coast.
Bedtime for Billy. Yeah, so I guess if there are more questions, we could maybe, Billy has agreed to stay on for just a few more minutes if there's more questions. Otherwise, we'll just wrap up.
I can answer it is Billy Buffington on IG. Is one of the questions is, do you have an IG account? And I will also put that information on the replay page that you will receive. Someone's asking, are you familiar with Dr. Joe Dispenza's work?
Dispenza, yeah, everybody
Yeah.
knows him.
Yes, I am familiar with Dr. Dispenza's work, and there's an interesting link there too. You know, something that Joe is really a proponent of, which can be kind of, you know, you hear it a lot, and you can kind of, it's one of those things you hear it so much you can kind of like let it flow by, which is like visualization, for example. And Dr. Robert Becker showed this as well in some of these electrical systems of the body, that actually when you visualize something, that could be visualize, you know, studies on this, visualize working out an injured arm, right? It could be visualized playing the piano. It could be visualizing having making the basketball shot. It could be visualizing an important thing you want to have happen. That there is a way in which you are actually, this delineation between real and imagined starts to break down a bit. That you can really, what Dispenza would talk a bit about would be really put yourself into a frequency or a state of being that kind of gets you there already. And that, gets us into an interesting conversation as well. But I certainly think there's some seeds with his work that I think that are certainly profound.
Yeah, I think what he says partially is that your brain, as you're imagining something, is not saying, is this real or is this false? It's accepting what you're thinking about.
Right.
Without, I think I'm really dumbing it down. I'm sure there's a better way of putting this, but it's like what you're thinking is reality. Whether if what you're dreaming becomes a reality, it on some level. And anyway, he as I understand it, requires like daily meditation, like
Well,
daily meditation.
and in Buddhism, they don't distinguish between the real and the imagined, and there is a way in which this is all imagined. Our nervous system is interpreting signals from our senses. Indirect realism would be the philosophical term. Like, in some profound sense, we are constructing all of this, and the meditators will tell you that the whole mind, the ego, this whole thing is a construction, and liberation is actually letting that construction kind of fall away and touching something more fundamental. So there's a great deep thread we could have under some stars about that conversation. I see a question about the method of infrared light saunas, which is another really good one. What I'll touch on with that is I think they can be helpful. I actually prefer, for various reasons, like a powerful like Finnish sauna. And there's more research on that, but infrared light broadly, whether it's the sauna or some of the infrared light therapy, is really good stuff. It is whether it's with mitochondrial health, whether it's with injury, whether it's with inflammation. There are all of these. You could find thousands of research articles on research databases. But something I love to remind people is infrared saunas can be great. Do you know what the best source of infrared light is? It's the sun. 42% of the sun's rays are infrared and it's free, and it's actually in a far wider spectrum. And infrared light devices are trying to mimic the sun a bit, but I think a heuristic or a shortcut that I hope to come through in this conversation is we can get smart and clever enough to mimic nature in all these ways, but there's always going to be a million and one things that we're not, the unknown unknowns. All these things happening in nature with an order and a synchrony that we have evolved with, lock and key, over millions, billions of years. And so the default should always be nature's got it figured out a little bit better. It's not to fall into a naturalistic fallacy and say, we shouldn't, protect ourselves from bears, or that clothes in winter are bad, right? Like there is obviously a middle ground here. But that's all to say, yes, I think infrared, if you have access to one, it can be saunas and cold and contrast therapy can be great, particularly useful in the winter time in northern latitudes. So here it's hard to get my skin exposed to the healing rays of the sun when it's -10 degrees in February. If I'm lucky enough to live in Southern California, like I think many of you here, I'm always going to opt to be in the sun if I can. But there's used as a treatment tool and modality, infrared light is a really, and near infrared light and red light are great therapeutic tools.
Good. What else, Jesse? Anything? I see that Ruth had a question.
Yeah, that was the question.
Oh, okay.
We answered it. So I think we are good with questions unless somebody wants to unmute and ask a question. But I think we're good. You can go ahead and wrap it up.
Okay, well, Dr. Billy, thank you so very much. You are an absolute wealth of knowledge, and I'm not going to let you disappear from my life because I really love to tap into that wealth of knowledge. And I appreciate you being here today. And if anybody has anything else to say, if you would like to say a last word or two, Billy, otherwise we'll shut down and I'll run outside and see if the sun's out.
I can see Ramsey's out as a friend of mine is on the beach right now catching. He's putting it into action. See, Ramsey's he's living the science. You know, it's one thing to talk about it. Let's live about it. That's the setting sun has more predominant infrared rays. So that is the quite literal healing light that he's getting. He's grounded on the wet sand, which is especially grounding. There's actually almost nothing better you could do at this time of day than what Ramsey is doing right at this moment. So let's take his lead. Thank you all for, humoring me, as obviously I have a lot of deep interest in all of these topics. And Audrey, I'm very struck by, that you're writing a book that has Robert O. Becker in your bibliography. Like it's a very, serendipitous, maybe even synchronistic, coincidence here. So let's definitely keep in touch as the picture unfolds. Keep the conversation going.
Absolutely. Okay. Thank you so much, everybody. Thank you, Dr. Billy Buffington.
Right,
and we'll be on next month with a special acupuncturist, and the following month we'll be on with a person who is an expert in Rife technology, which is the same as Edna Tunney. That was resonant light technologies, the use of vibration to address disease. So we have a good lineup, and I really appreciate this, Billy. Thank you so much. Bye-bye, everybody.